Right, so we're recording, and again, in the theory, it should be going to live. Let's just hit refresh.
Here we are.
Yeah,
The
we're
Hoon
good now.
for Friday, 2nd of June, live. There's no picture, it's just of the Hoon.
Cool,
Oh,
cool.
actually, 1 second, live.
Yeah, it'll go up shortly.
It'll go up shortly, yeah.
Yeah,
There we are.
cool.
Tickety
Excellent.
boo.
Thank you. Well done with the settings. Okay.
Thanks, Simon.
Alrighty, we're recording at my end, recording there, and we're all good to go. Okay. 5, 4, 3, 2. Tēnā koutou katoa. It's lovely to see you, Peter, in Los Angeles. And of
Now,
course,
Bernard, I'm so ashamed, but I have to make an apology to you and to Simon and to our audience for missing last week. I had set up a position in Times Square, which truly is the most hideous place in the whole of New York, I must admit. And I had all my mics and everything laid out, and I slept through my alarm to get up at 1 o'clock. So I do apologise. I woke up at 2 and just could have thought,
oh no, it's
bugger
all right.
this, and rolled over. So, but I am here. It's LA's a little bit easier. It's 10 o'clock.
Oh, good.
And I've just been out to dinner with glamorous people in LA. Talking about. I mean, one of the problems about if you're in LA more than about two hours, or maybe a couple of days, possibly a week, you start to lose all perspective, and you say, well, it's just like Dustin said in Rain Man. You lose all of your references to Shakespeare or anything like that, and it all becomes about what Dustin said in Rain Man, or what, as Arnold said, I'll be back. But I'll be back in New Zealand next week.
I'll be back. Very good.
Yeah.
Loving to hear that. Yeah.
I think I'll be back in time for us to do one more before you go away, right?
Actually, no. I'm heading overseas with Lynn next Thursday night. So.
Oh Christ, we might have to do an early one then.
Possibly.
Why don't we do one from the airport just before you leave? Because nothing could increase the drama of leaving more
Yeah,
than.
indeed.
I suppose you probably want me to drive you to the bloody airport, do you?
Yeah,
bugger?
I can feel the
Which I
stress.
certainly can.
I can feel the stress emanating up the stairs from down below where Lynn
Yeah.
is going.
Well, I'm very happy to drive you to the airport. So, and we have to, let's take a vote with the audience as well, whether they'd like me and Simon to keep the podcast going while you're
Oh
away.
yeah. No, I'm all keen
Yeah.
to let other people do the work. This is fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, really good. Really good.
So
We're
I do
looking forward to
apologise
it.
for last week. I've done it from Perugia, Spain. Did I do one from Oslo? Yes, I did one from Oslo.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ, it's
I
been
know.
it's been
it's been amazing.
Yeah.
And you had foxes and the whole thing.
Yeah.
No, we're very, very
Well, I
lucky
was
to get-
thinking. So I was having dinner tonight down by Venice Beach, not Serenissimo, not the real Venice, but the Los Angeles Santa Monica Venice, and I was thinking of doing it from the Muscle Beach.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but I thought possibly, I could lose my computer and my phone and be, anyway. So here I am at my friend's house in Venice Beach. So I'm not doing it literally from the beach, but I'm near the beach.
Fantastic. No, it's been a heck of a week here as well. We're gearing up for the election. But tell us about, what you've been hearing around the traps, New York, Los Angeles, what's happening in America.
Oh, well,
What's
as
everyone
you
talking about?
know, Bernard, it only takes me about 30 minutes to be in any country to realise, the
What are
deep
the taxi drivers
insight of what's going on. I think more or less nobody has noticed the US debt crisis, which has just been averted as we're speaking. I mean, this is no way to run, the world's most important superpower. And actually, I've been thinking a lot, as you do when you come to the States, about the sort of remnant thing about it being a superpower. And there's no doubt, of course, that it is, a place that's just so tremendously capable of constant renewal and economic generation and momentum. But
That's the thing about
also
America.
got
You always
completely
go.
stuffed infrastructure in many respects, and this kind of political fiasco that's going on at the moment, that's just been going on, where everything has to go to the brink.
Yeah, it's this. I mean, whenever you go to America, you always feel the hustle culture. It's like you can smell it as you go out of the plane. The whole, the energy, everyone's got an idea.
No,
Everyone's
Christ,
going to be
Alberta,
rich.
I've raised so much Series A capital in the last 2 days and done my pitches and yeah,
No.
yeah,
It's a weird place, and you're right. If only they could harness all that and have some decent
which they can,
underlying stuff.
they
Yeah.
constantly can, but just this political. I was thinking, looking at it today, the way that I mean, I was with somebody who knows Trump very well when I was up over in New York, and this is somebody who talks to Trump or Trump's people almost every day, and there would appear to be no doubt that he will in fact be the Republican candidate in 2024. And I think the idea of that, when I think of, I mean, we talked a few weeks ago about the piece that my friend Geraldine Brooks wrote for the Sydney Morning Herald about how dangerous it was for Australia to get into AUKUS and into that whole submarine deal when it was still possible that Trump would get in. And I think that's a really, it brings some of these things right back to New Zealand. We've got to be really, really treading carefully right now.
Yeah, no, we're lucky today. We're going to be talking to Robert Patman soon, and also Sam Shashteva, former colleague of mine
Oh, excellent.
from Newsroom. Sam is the author of a book that's just been published called The China Tightrope, and has had to think and report very deeply on this issue of which way do we.
You mean as opposed to our once over lightly on the podcast once a week?
Well, we've got the cumulative, layer the layers on until you get something nice and hard and thick. Sam's has done a lot of work on this, and his book has been a quite high profile here, and it's great. Looking forward to having a chat to Sam. We've had many good chats in the press gallery.
Oh, Jesus, John
office.
Irving is complaining there was just too much chit chat.
Too much to chat. Fair
I
enough.
mean, John thinks this is his podcast, not ours.
I
And
mean,
we're chit-chatting about important things. Thank you
Yeah,
very
yeah.
much, John.
So, and just an update on the political news from here, Peter, where this week the National Party, as we sort of talked about last week, they confirmed that they've dumped the compulsory three townhouses on a section
Yeah.
thing, ended the bipartisan hope, and I interviewed Chris Bishop this week, and the interview is out on the Spin-Off today, in which he said he wanted a big New Zealand. He wouldn't say exactly how big he wanted it, but he wanted councils to plan for that big New Zealand and to ensure there was enough housing supply there. The other thing that's really I've noticed this week is that the tone and the pace of the electioneering has really ramped up this week. So
Yeah.
right from the start, National hammering away at Labor on spending. Labor's been actually pretty effective and sharp going back at National and saying, hey, you're a bunch of extremists. And
So we're already in a phony war.
yeah, it's pretty
How
full
long does
on.
the election campaign normally? I mean, has this been the case under proportional representation that the election campaign starts 6 months ahead?
Yeah, and it's increasingly front-loaded election campaigning now because there's a good 2 or 3 weeks of early voting. So the issue here is, often you would have planned your campaigning to have all your good stuff at the end, all your big hits, all of your takedowns. But there's no point in taking someone down 3 days out from the election when 30% of the voters have already come in. So that will be, and the increase in the early vote in the last election was so big. And
Just because of convenience.
I think what happened was COVID encouraged people to, obviously you don't want 1,000 people turning up at the one polling booth in 2 hours and giving each other COVID. That encouraged people to do it early. But I think just think it's more convenient for people's lifestyles. You want flexibility. You don't want to have to, be in a certain place at a certain time.
And you
on a
certainly also
Saturday.
don't want to put any further obstacles in the way of people voting. I mean, I
Yeah.
don't know whether you saw, Bernard, that the UK introduced, without any evidence, a thing very similar to some of the things that the Americans are trying to do about having to require ID before you vote. And it's had a huge effect on the local elections in the UK. So I think we need to be extremely careful about keeping New Zealand kind of open in
Yeah,
that regard.
because we think for so long that
Oh,
we are.
here he is.
Robert, how are you?
Hello, sorry.
God, you handsome devil.
Fantastic to see you. And you're out and about on a bit of a holiday before the last rush of exams. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. That's what My family and I have been here since last night. So yeah, having a few days in Lake Hull, we're one of our favourite spots. So yeah,
Wonderful. Now, Robert, it's been a busy old week in Ukraine and in Moscow.
Busy,
Really pretty.
busy is a very weird thing to say, Bernard. When Kiev's been had bloody Iskander missiles fired at it, overnight, and yeah, busy. The suburb around where Vladimir has been quite busy with
busy.
drones flying into the
Well, there's a
people's
lot of
windows.
buzzing, busy.
Yeah.
Is yeah. So, Robert, what did you think of these drone attacks in Moscow? And you're saying, Peter, there's been some fresh ones on Kiev just in the last couple of
Well,
hours.
the Russians, yeah, not, but yeah, but there's the Russians have been doing this for weeks now,
oh yeah,
and it's quite, it's pretty brutal. It's
it
been going on
is.
since Victory Day.
Yeah, and Peter's absolutely right. About 20 drone attacks by Russia on Kiev during the month of May, and now we're in June, and they're continuing. And the attempt by Putin apparently is an attempt by the regime to undermine domestic support for Zelensky's approach to the war. I think it's backfiring. It doesn't seem to be greatly diminishing Ukrainian resilience. And of course, the Ukrainians who are preparing their own counteroffensive, I actually think it's actually began. They've been taking shaping operations, as military analysts like to call it, and that includes drone attacks on Moscow itself, including some of the wealthiest areas where Mr.
Yeah, yeah,
Putin's
exactly.
entourage live.
Yeah,
The idea they can sit back in comfort and rain terror on Ukraine and not pay any price,
but it
those
is
days are
quite
over.
entertaining for them to have a bit of a wake-up call, isn't it?
It is, and it's not just drone attacks on Moscow. We were talking a few weeks ago about those mysterious drones that appeared just over the Kremlin. But these drone attacks now seem to be, according to Telegram, there were 25 in the Ukrainian drones.
Yeah,
Well, we're not sure they're Ukrainian. The Ukrainians, of course, deny all knowledge of
yeah,
this.
which
What
is
we
which
do
is
know,
which is really good because I mean, I still wonder whether those ones that we talked about at the very beginning of May, which I talked about today in my spin-off thing, or yesterday in my spin-off thing, they were more or less sort of hobbyist DJI drones, whereas these ones were much more interesting kind of and more dangerous small fixed wing ones, which have a range apparently of up to 700 kilometers.
Wow.
yes. And of course, when you join that together with the relentless nightly attacks that are going on within Russia in various locations, I think the Russians are beginning to get a different picture of the war, and it's certainly
Yeah.
coming home to them.
It's very
And
interesting, Robert. I was really struck. There was a piece I read this week which talked about the people who attacked the supposed Russian partisans who attacked Belgorod and the villages just south of between Belgorod and the Ukraine border were apparently driving Humvees supplied to the Ukrainian army by the United States. And this is going to cause some issues, as we say, isn't it?
I don't think
Can you
so. I
can
think
you
both the
imagine the
I
Russian
like the
soldiers?
British explanation, which was the British were the government minister was asked about this, whether they were angry with the Ukrainians taking the battle into Russia, and he said, "Well, look, the Russians have been attacking Ukraine from Russia, and yet they expect no retaliation to come their way." He said, "That's not how war works." He said, "We're happy to support Ukraine." The government minister said in Britain they're happy to support Ukraine's efforts to repel Russian aggression, wherever it comes from, whether in
But
Russia.
there's going to be a problem, though, isn't there, Robert? When I mean, I going to the sort of geopolitical thing, which is your true skill. It's very interesting to me that Zelensky was in Moldova this week talking about it really is important that the EU and NATO accelerate membership talks for both Ukraine and Moldova and offer some security guarantees to Moldova, which, as we know, is right next to Odessa. The Russians have fired across it. It's a very risky place to be, and you've also got the constant aggression from, or the constant running sore of the Transdniester Republic in Moldova. I wondered whether Zelensky was essentially indicating that a little bit of nerves about about the solidity of the Western alliance.
Maybe, but you could interpret it in another way. Zelensky also said when he was in Moldova that it would be best for the Russian troops to leave Moldova or the Transnistria region because that's their best way of surviving, which implied that the Ukrainian counteroffensive may not be just confined to displacing Russian occupation of Ukraine. I think the Ukrainians are taking considerable comfort from the divisions which are clearly opening up in Moscow. Prigozhin's expletive-deleted tirades are causing some enormous irritation within the Russian government. He may think he's untouchable because Wagner played a key role in taking Bakhmut, although, as we discussed many times before, at great
It's irrelevant.
cost to human lives. But there are signs also, a character called Igor Girkin, who was involved in the annexation of Crimea, claims credit for spearheading it. He's also
He was one of the little green men.
yeah,
He was
he's
the
been
leader of the
extremely
little green men, in
critical
fact.
also of Putin's leadership. And I mean, I think there's evidence that Putin, well, it's not evidence. I would think if I was in Putin's shoes, I'd be quite nervous about when there's a counteroffensive unfolds, and it probably will unfold. It's unfolding at the moment, but it will probably gather momentum in June.
Is there a worry though for the Ukrainians that they do their thing through this summer, but they really have to get things done reasonably quickly? Otherwise, there is a risk that A, they lose support through Europe, but B, as we were talking about with Peter early on, can you imagine a President Trump? He's not going to be sending stuff to.
Well, no, he'll solve it
Ukraine.
in 24 hours, he said.
I think that's a good point, Bernard, and I think the Ukrainians are acutely aware of this. And I think the Biden administration, by the way, I know foreign policy is not seen as a vote winner in the United States, but if Ukraine succeeds, I do not think this is a fantasy. If Ukraine succeeds in defeating Putin by October, Mr. Biden will be very happy with that because that would set him up nicely for next year, saying he kept his nerve. And unlike Mr. Trump, who did nothing despite the fact he was in power for 4 years after Putin took Crimea. I wouldn't say it was a huge deal, but I think both Biden and Zelensky are keen to get on with the job. And from Biden's point of view, if the counteroffensive can be completed successfully before the end of the year, that would put him in a strong domestic political position as having come to the aid of a democracy which Mr. Trump has never shown much concern about. In fact, his friend has been sitting in the Kremlin. And I think Biden could use that to good political effect in the election. But Bernard's quite right. There's the stakes are quite high here.
Yeah, Robert, I much prefer it when you say that I'm quite right than Bernard's quite right. But, how big does the...
Sometimes it's preferable when you sleep in.
You're always right. You know that.
Jesus, Bernard, thanks very much. I'm actually really worried about your backdrop. There's some sort of German eagle behind, sort of double-headed eagle, but it's actually a kaka, I think. Yeah. Is it a kaka imprinted on some sort of
it's a cushion cover.
Kayapoi blanket?
It's a cushion
Well, I
cover.
haven't really studied the property we're renting, so...
Yeah.
Speaking of
Robert,
backgrounds,
you're right. Yeah,
sorry, wait a second. But Robert, how big does the Ukrainian response have to be? The Ukrainian, what does victory look like?
I think victory from the Ukrainians' point of view is the ejection of all Russian troops from occupied territories. Mr. Zelensky in the last 24 hours has said there'll be no negotiation with Russia until they leave the illegally occupied parts of Ukraine, which include the Crimea. And by the way, if they do cut off Crimea and annex Crimea, I think Mr. Putin will be looking for a bolt somewhere.
Claim it back, not annex. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Annex. If they annex Crimea, or take back, I should say, Crimea, I think it's very bad news for Mr. Putin. But look, as we all know, war is an unpredictable business, and I just think the Ukrainians have momentum. They have shown themselves to be military competent. They are engaged in some sophisticated psychological operations at the moment using these drones. And of course, at the same time, they're taking a lot of punishment themselves, as you pointed out, Peter.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So that's one of the big contests between Russia and Ukraine. But the other big contest on the geopolitical stage is between the United States and China. And we're very lucky and pleased to welcome in Sam Sachdeva from Wellington. Sam, lovely to see you.
Lovely to be here. Thanks for having me, Bernard and Peter.
Sam, you're a noted author now, which that elevates your position even beyond what it was before. You've got a considered view.
Oh, well, that for in life.
Yeah, and I absolutely love your backdrop with the book, The China Tightrope. There's a link in the email that's gone out, and I'll include it in the podcast email that goes out tomorrow. Sam, can you talk us through, what was your thinking behind writing the book? How did you go about it? And what surprised you in the process of writing it?
Yeah, so I first started working on this in late 2021, and I think for a few years now, there's been a real sense that we're at an inflection point in the relationship, that things are changing dramatically. As I sort of noted in the introduction, we had the 50th anniversary of diplomatic relations last year, and you look at the hoopla or lack thereof, and compare it with the 40th anniversary in 2013, and you just get a sense of how much more fraught these things are. I was at a meeting yesterday, and someone was saying, the list of sensitive areas, the areas where we have to treat carefully, where we disagree with China, is growing, and it's only growing by the day. It's ratcheting up one way. So this is basically a sort of half stock take. Trying to look at how we've got to where we are with China, the FTA, before that, the sort of poll tax going way back in the Chinese migrants, and also trying to look and say what are some of the big issues that we're going to have to deal with in the years to come around decoupling, around trade diversification, and so on. In terms of surprises, I don't know how surprising this was, but the fact that so many people are still so wary of talking about China, even in some cases anonymously. You had members of the business community who initially said, yeah, look, we're happy to have a chat to you, and then ended up sort of walking away. Politicians, quite senior politicians, diplomats, and so on.
Do you mean, Sam, that they just don't want to touch it?
Yeah. I think they calculate that any benefit of having an open, anonymous discussion is outweighed by the risks of saying something wrong and leading to some sort of action from China or.
So may I ask, Sam, one of the things that I've written in various pieces in the North and South over the past couple of months is that it seems to me that certainly Jacinda Ardern and especially Nanaia Mahuta have actually been quite effective in being quite subtle about the way they've treated China, that they've understood the sensitivity of this and handled it really remarkably well, not being bellicose, but being quite subtle, though not necessarily transparent with the New Zealand public about what they're doing or the media. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, no, I would agree with that entirely, Peter. I think, for all that there's been brickbats thrown our way from Australia and the UK and other sort of parts of the globe, there's this perennial line that it's 4.5 eyes or 4 eyes and we're on the cusp of being kicked out. I think actually our approach on the whole has been a really welcome one. That sort of playing it both ways a little bit, saying, look, we have a strong security relationship with the United States, we have a strong cultural relationship, but we are going to keep working with China. And this line about an independent foreign policy, sometimes it gets misinterpreted and it's not necessarily always helpful, but actually it's broadly the right one. And you look at what's happened in Australia with the change of government, Anthony Albanese and Penny Wong coming in, and actually I think that on China in tone is much more closely aligned to what we've seen in New Zealand in the last few years.
Yeah. Robert, what do you think about this approach that, the subtlety approach that, I mean, Sam's I think, Sam, do you argue in the book that this is the right approach to be, that you've got to stay engaged with China?
Yes, absolutely. And I think I made the point in sort of in the conclusion or the final chapter is that, the problems, some of the global problems we're dealing with, climate change and so on, they are far too big to shut out a country with a population of 1.4 billion people. In
Yeah.
general, you can't shut it out. So yes, I think engagement is the way to go. We need to be willing to speak out when we have concerns about human rights and other areas of China's policy. But yeah, we can't ignore them or try and relegate them to the fringes of the world stage.
And
Sam,
Robert, so is Sam being naive in that?
No, I first of all, congratulations, Sam, on your publication. I really look forward to reading it. I think it's a wonderful development because it is much needed. We needed something, a book length treatment of New Zealand's relationship with China. But I actually think it's engagement without illusions. That is to say that, in a sense, compared with their predecessors, Jacinda Ardern, and now Chris Hipkins and Foreign Minister Nanaia Mahuta, they have been quite critical on occasions with the Chinese. Some of that we understand has been conducted in private. But at the same time, they haven't necessarily bought into the hyped up threat view of China. That is to say, they refuse to in Jacinda Ardern's words, the Labour government has refused to pigeonhole China and Russia together. And the thing is, I think there's something I think is important about this nuanced position, is that it doesn't exaggerate the Chinese threat. China has vulnerabilities. And what are the vulnerabilities? China still remains heavily dependent for its economic prosperity on through three large markets, which is the United States, EU, and Japan, despite the Belt and Road Initiative. And secondly, I think it's also shrewd, because while Xi Jinping is the paramount leader in China, and it's difficult to read the tea leaves, so to speak, when you're dealing with an authoritarian regime, there is evidence that there is differences of view in the Central Committee of the ruling Communist Party. So, in a sense, I think New Zealand's approach always keeps the possibility of dialogue alive, and in a sense, doesn't play into the hands of the hardliners in the Chinese leadership. And that may be one of the dangers of AUKUS, by the way, that it confirms
It pushes in that
Xi has
direction.
always said about the United States, and by implication, Australia and the UK.
Sam, I'm curious to see what you think of both sides of the political sphere in New Zealand, and any long-term diplomatic relationship. It's been one of those areas where there hasn't been too much daylight between the main parties on big foreign affairs issues. But in this case, unlike some of its conservative counterparts in Australia and the US and the UK, have been much more, for the want of a better word, pro-China than their compatriots. What's your view on how the potential government within 4 or 5 months might change the relationship or take a different view?
Yeah, I mean, you've nailed it in one bit. It is quite striking, right? You look at conservative parties in other parts of the West, very strongly anti-China and hawkish, if that's the right word, and that's the opposite case here. So I think part of that is the legacy of the 2008 FTA. They didn't sign that deal, the national government, but they certainly benefited from it. So I think if you look at some of what Sir John Key has said very publicly about China, he's pretty much at the fringe, and I think he acknowledges that. But I think there's probably a view within the National Party that's the same. So, look, I think maybe we see a slightly more welcoming approach to China, but I wouldn't want to take that too far. I get the sense that for all that Jerry Brownlee and to the extent Christopher Luxon might have warm words, I think you get into office, you get those briefings from MFAT officials, defence officials, intelligence officials, and there are sort of underlying characteristics there in the relationship and areas of concern that are not going to go away. So that we might see a slight improvement.
How did you gauge, or what did you gauge to be the level of New Zealand's diplomatic competence at the moment?
Oh, that is a great question. I think
I mean, now that you've finished it
uh,
and you don't need to talk to them anymore, you might as well tell me.
no,
I think
exactly. Time to
I think
burn
his
them
day
all.
job might dictate that. But anyway,
Yes, yes. Well, no, a little bit more freedom. Yes, I mean,
Geniuses. They're all bloody geniuses.
yeah.
if you were going to be charitable, you would call it strategic ambiguity. I think
Hmm.
less charitably, you could say it's a little bit of a mess. And I think part of that is the change from Jacinda Ardern to Chris Hipkins, as you said, Peter. Jacinda very adept in terms of foreign policy and very across, I think, the New Zealand messaging. And, it wasn't that way for her at the start, but she was very, very adept by the end. And I don't think Chris Hipkins has that background or that inclination to spend a lot of time on it in an election year. So you end
But are
up,
there enough? Are there enough people in MFAT who are really excellent at their job?
oh,
About
enough would
China,
be
I
the
mean.
issue. Yeah. Look, I think there are very good China people in there, but then there are still probably conflicting narratives. You get the sort of the T and MFAT, the very trade focused people who do
Mm.
see it primarily in economic terms, and you see, on the defence side, I know we're talking about MFAT, but I think the defence MFAT dynamic is interesting in itself. If you look at some of what Andrew
Yeah.
Neil's been saying recently
Mm.
around AUKUS and China, so yeah, I
Yeah,
think
it's funny you should say
there are.
that, Sam, because I was wondering the other night idly whether we need to go back to having a Ministry of Foreign Affairs, including potentially a Ministry of Foreign Affairs where the Prime Minister is in fact the Minister of Foreign Affairs, which we had effectively under Norman Kirk, um, which apparently was a bit of a golden age.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. I'll confess I don't know a huge amount about the structure back then, but I think the degree to which MFAT has become a trade ministry is pretty obvious, and they're having to adjust to that, I think.
Mm.
But it does sometimes feel still that they're too heavily oriented towards seeing foreign policy through a trade lens. And,
Yeah, that's very interesting, Sam.
India,
Thank
for
you.
example, that's, an issue.
Just finally, Sam, congratulations, by the way, on the book. It's fantastic to see and very well deserved the excellent reception it's getting. Just one final thing, though. In reporting the book and your general reporting, you will have spoken to many people, off the record in the foreign affairs, diplomatic communities, maybe even the security communities, who obviously didn't want to go on the record. What's your sense of what they really, really think
Mm.
about China? When they've had 3 or 4 beers or 6 coffees. What do they really
Some
think?
Baiju,
Obviously,
maybe.
I think it's glasses of polyfume, isn't it?
uh, maybe, or maybe
Yeah.
it's the very spicy drink you drink in China.
Yeah, Baiju, I think,
Baijiu.
probably the F one. Yeah, look, I think there is real concern about the trajectory we're heading towards, and the sense that this is not going to be a problem that diminishes, that we're going to have these frictions, this need to sort of walk a tightrope pretty carefully, and uncertainty. So yeah, I don't think there's a lot of optimists around, to be honest. So it's how bad things get over. Yeah, I think people are worried about what it means for New Zealand as a small country that relies so heavily on these international organisations staying together and holding.
And do you sense that the trading community really are ready? If, for example, there is some rupture, some conflict, real drama in Taiwan, and you see some sort of mass pullback in trade, like we saw overnight with Russia, is New Zealand ready to handle that?
No, in a word, no. I think for all the talk of diversification, and ministers have been going on about this for years, if not decades. I don't think we're seeing that from businesses, and their argument as well. If we've got Chinese consumers who are going to pay a 400% premium for our product, why should we try and move it elsewhere
Mm.
when we've got to deal with the markets? So I don't think we've seen. I think there's still
Yeah, but Sam, we just the agreement with the UK came into effect this week. That's surely going to radicalise, transform New
problems are
Zealand's trade balance.
solved.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's Brexit is it's a huge asset for New Zealand.
Rule Britannia.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so that will help. that will help, but it's leading a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. So I think they're going to have to. NZTA, other government officials are really going to have to push this. But ultimately, if there is that complacency from businesses, there's not much we can do about it.
Sam, thank you very much. I'll let you get back to your evening there. Lovely to see you again. I look forward to having a good, quiet read of the book on my overseas holiday, and I hope you also get a bit of a rest at some point as well before the election,
thank
because
you.
that'll be a very quiet time.
I should say very briefly as well that this would probably not have been possible producing this book without our very long conversations in the newsroom gallery office about China and China's relationship with New Zealand while you were still working there. So I probably owe a huge debt to you for this.
Thank you.
Gosh, that's very generous of you, Sam. Don't his head's big enough already.
I thank you for that, and I also am proud actually that one of the things I was involved in was setting up the newsroom bureau in the Parliamentary Press Gallery, and also making sure that we covered foreign affairs. And you've done an amazing job with newsroom pushing that. And I think you've been one of the main ways in which this debate about China has progressed in New Zealand.
Yeah, it's so important because there doesn't seem to be, Sam, and maybe Robert too, there doesn't seem to be the level of, I know your student, Jeffrey Miller, Robert, is doing some good work in this area, but there doesn't seem to be the level of scrutiny or transparency they're coming the other way from the foreign ministry and so on about some of these issues. I've found it very difficult to, I mean, Sam's there, he can walk across to whatever ghastly real ale places on the terrace and talk to them. But, you know, there doesn't seem to be this kind of connection between Wellington-based journalism and government departments anymore, particularly the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Is that true, Sam? And Robert, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I'll talk very briefly. I'm sure Robert's got a lot of good insights into this. I think, foreign policy, if we look at it specifically, was still so shallow, I think, in terms of media coverage, but also think tanks. I think there are academics who do great work, like Robert and others. I know I talk a lot to the people at Victoria University, but actually we've seen, the last couple of weeks, they're looking at making pretty significant cuts, and a lot of those cuts are in languages on the humanities, and that's really concerning. So, I think there's a gap in that space. In terms of that dialogue between journalists and government officials, the walls have gone up, and that's been a trend over the last decade or 2 decades. So it is a problem. I don't think you get that transparency and that ability to talk on background with officials, the rare exception being overseas trips with the Prime Minister, where sometimes they will be quite engaging, and it's actually very useful, and I don't know why they don't do it more often, because
no,
they
exactly.
see the benefit from that.
Robert, what do you think? Because I was quite flabbergasted that Nana Mahuta could go to Beijing without any reporters with her.
Yeah. Well, I think that's regrettable, and I agree with what Sam said. There's been an interesting trend slightly the other way, though, that governments in recent years, including MFAT and Ministry of Defence, have engaged in outreach activities to the universities. And one of the interesting things, and I'm sure Sam is following this as I am, there's quite an interesting debate around AUKUS with some academics, such as my colleague, Associate Professor Nicholas Koo, Dr. Ruben Steff at Waikato University, coming out very strongly for membership of AUKUS, and the skeptics like myself not quite so convinced. So the reason I mention that is that it is regrettable that people like Sam, who's done a great job, I believe, I read a lot of your stuff, Sam, in Newsroom. I think it's wonderful. I think we're taking foreign affairs more seriously, thanks to people like Sam. And it's very important because I think New Zealand sometimes talks about it itself as if it's irrelevant, it's just a small state. But other countries don't see us that way. And, in a sense, it's very important that we do have informed debates domestically, and people like Sam are key parts of that, because without the media coverage, how can we have a debate?
Yeah. Robert and Sam, thank you so much for being on the show. Lovely to have you. It's time now to zoom back in to Wellington, but this time not Wellington in an MFAT or parliamentary sense, but Wellington local government and an area that I think is actually increasingly important. What's actually happening on the ground with our councils, with our house builders, with our road builders, in dealing with not just our housing shortages but our climate issues. And Tamitha Paul is councillor at the Wellington City Council. Tamitha, kia ora and welcome into the Hoon. It's lovely to see you.
Kia ora, Bernard. How's it going?
Great. Now, I am fascinated with the Lambton Quay cycleway. I care
Thorndon
about
Quay.
Sorry,
Thorndon
the Thorndon
Quay.
Quay. Sorry, the Thorndon Quay. We should have one on Lambton Quay as well.
And we will.
Yeah, the Thorndon Quay cycleway. For those of you who aren't in Wellington, it's one of those sort of main commuter routes in from the likes of Johnsonville, Kandala, and the Hutt into Wellington for those people who are driving. And if we're going to move to change our modes, we need a lot more cycleways there. And 2 years ago, the council voted to put in a cycleway, and to do that, it needed to take out 144 angled car parks and replace them with parallel parks. Can you explain for us all why 2 years on, there's still not much going on there?
So I think it comes back to the fact that councils are controlled by the framework that are put in place by government, and Minister Woods has been really good at identifying those barriers, because, for example, every time we take out one single car park or try to make one single change to one single car park, we have to go through this really long process, traffic resolution process, and there are so many opportunities throughout that process for people to really derail it. And it really stops us from taking a holistic approach to decarbonising the transport system, because that's kind of the number one priority, at least for me. And then number two, but just as important, is making sure that we have a safe transport system and that people can, and that's kind of the priority for Thorndon Quay, is making it safer. But this traffic resolution process is archaic. I mean, it just allows for the interests of the few to overwhelm the interest in the public good of the many. And so that's why we are, yet to see changes on Thorndon Quay.
So just the background for our listeners elsewhere, and for those people who haven't been keeping up with the latest news on the Thorndon Quay drama, announced in mid-2021 from the council, we're going to go ahead and do this. And then the Thorndon Quay Collective, which is a whole bunch of business owners, shop owners, various people along Thorndon Quay who want to keep the angled car parks, challenged it in the High Court. It was rejected by the court, and have just in the last couple of days decided to take it to the appeals court. This is one of the highest courts in the land, and we're debating a bunch of car parks. It is quite a thing. How are we going to get over this if we're going to actually make progress? Because this system essentially weaponizes the status quo. And just, for disclosure, you're a candidate on the provisional green list for the election this year. Is that right, Tamitha?
I'm standing for Wellington Central, but I'm not standing for the list. Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you think we should change it centrally? If it's going to be the central government setting the tone and the rules, how do we do it?
Well, I think this process and this situation that's happened is really, it's really a result of what is quite prevalent throughout local government, which is that people with a lot of privilege and power are able to disrupt everything. And it's not just in the transport system, it's also in housing, and the ability for communities to say, well, not in my backyard, And so I think what needs to happen here is our Transport Minister really needs to make it a lot easier for councils to deliver kind of more networks for their city, particularly transport networks, because it's really hard to, you can't take the view of what are the kind of discrete concerns of particular areas. You kind of have to take this whole network approach, because if we're trying to deliver a citywide cycleway network, which only impacts 20% of the total of all the roads in Wellington, and of which we're 2/3 of the way, by the way, which is pretty exciting. But if we were to listen to every single person that said, well, not here, you can't do it here, then we would achieve absolutely nothing. And it's also really frustrating because we won't be able to realize the full impacts and benefits of this cycleway network or of all the other changes we're making to the wider transport system until it's a total network. So that's a really frustrating part about it moving so slowly and about it being so disjointed, is that we won't see the full benefits. We won't see more people on bikes. We won't see more women and children on bikes. We won't see greater bus efficiency and just the kind of wider benefits to the network until we've got that whole network in place. So I wish that the minister would come in and just say, look, go hard, do what you need to do to deliver the entire network, and we're going to remove all of the ability for people to disrupt
Tamitha,
that.
may I ask, it's Peter here, I'm Bernard's co-host. May I ask you a slightly provocative question on this? Because you mentioned net zero and the carbon element of this.
Yeah.
My sense was before you were just talking about the network that you were prioritising the carbon, New Zealand's carbon requirements, and this is part of that.
Mm-hmm.
Are you prioritising that over, or is there a risk that you're perceived of prioritising that over the sort of economic and economic business health of Wellington?
Kia ora, Peter. Sorry for not saying hello earlier.
That's all right.
No, I don't think so, because I think that what we kind of see internationally is that just because there's a cycleway doesn't mean it's going to be terrible for businesses, and it doesn't necessarily mean that there will be negative economic impacts. Like, it's obviously a really hard time to operate a business, and all of those things that we know. But who's to say that being able to get more people riding and walking through your neighbourhood and changing the way that people move about necessarily means that
I guess
your business will suffer.
I guess what I'm asking,
yeah.
Tamitha, is your personal political priority to meet those net zero requirements and to do whatever is required to meet those, or is it to make Wellington a more sophisticated place where people can make these? I totally understand the idea that once there is a classic thing with cycleways that if you build them, people will use them. If it's safe, people will use them. But which is your priority? Is it to help New Zealand meet its carbon requirements, or is it to provide this network?
This sounds like a cop-out, but it is all of those things, and that's why it's such an easy thing to advocate for, in my opinion, because it has so many co-benefits. From a city council perspective, the biggest thing that we can do to reduce our emissions, 50% of which come from car usage, is to make the buses more efficient and to get people walking and cycling. But from a safety perspective, it's like I couldn't even have a conscience if I had like I've listened for the last few years to children and mothers and all sorts of people come and talk to us and share their experience of how hostile it is riding a bike in Wellington. And so there's lots of co-benefits, but also, like, I've got a planning degree. I really want our city to be like an amazing space that people can move about, freely, confidently, independently, safely. And we're really behind in that space. We have such a outdated mode of transport, and just looking around our city, it's tired. And so there's also that kind of aspect that I'm interested in terms of revitalizing the city, making it a cool place to live, and getting up to scratch with the times. So it's all the co-benefits that
thank you.
Why I support it.
Brilliant, Tamitha. Thank you very much, and you're very welcome to stay on. Introduce into the Hoon Sarah Templeton, who is a councillor at the Christchurch City Council, and who is also having to think a lot about cycleways in various dramas. Sarah, for a wider audience right across the country, around the world, we've got quite a few people who dial in from wherever, including Peter, who is calling us from LA at the moment, on his way back.
Sarah, the
Sarah,
cycleways in LA are absolutely fantastic.
Really?
I rode on them today, and I felt like I was taking my life in my own hands.
I bet you did.
It was quite harrowing, but please continue. The infrastructure here is phenomenally terrible.
Yeah. Sarah, could you tell us what is going on in Christchurch with the Park Terrace Cycleway?
Kia ora koutou. Great to be invited on. Thank you for that. So, as you know, post-quake, Christchurch has put in plans for a network of major cycle routes, and they are partway built now. They're sort of 2/3 done. We've seen a huge increase in the number of people cycling, and not only the number of people cycling, but who's cycling. So in our central city now, we have 46% of cyclists are women, and that's virtually unheard of across the country. It normally sits under 30%. On some of our major cycleways now, we've got data that shows that 24% of people who were using them had switched from a vehicle for that trip. So it's showing that actual mode shift, not just potential. So we've started putting in a network of other cycleways too, and so little connections here and there where it's really needed. And one of these is along Rolleston Ave and Park Terrace as the museum's being redeveloped. And so what's happened is that we've put in this temporary infrastructure. Councillors were given a heads up ahead of time, and once it went in, as it was happening, there was a bit of congestion when roadworks happen, but that all happened within a period of 2 weeks, and then it was open. And my light's disappearing because I've been sitting too still for too long in an office.
It's fine. We can see you just fine.
It's all right. We can see you. And luckily for us,
Excellent.
this
The
is
light's
a
shining.
podcast.
The office is dying behind me.
That's all right. It's a podcast too, so we can hear you, and that's fantastic.
Excellent. And so in January, we got a memo that gave us a heads up on what was happening, and no one sent any feedback in saying that they didn't think it should happen. And it showed the full extent of where that would go. In March, we had a meeting with a briefing in public, and there's a live stream that people can see. That's completely dark now. Is it dark for you guys?
Oh, we can see you.
Well, no, it looks
the
like
cameras.
it's fine. It looks like you're under about 30,000 feet of water. It's fine.
Yeah. If you talk to Tam briefly, it'll take me 2 seconds to move and turn the light on again.
Okay.
Sure, Tam. What do you think about the crisis in Christchurch? And is it just that that the right is somehow anti-bicycle?
Nothing gets people more riled up than cycleways.
Yeah.
That's so true.
Yeah.
And I know that Wellington's experiencing that now, like we have in Christchurch. So I'm sorry about that. I did move just before I sat down.
That's okay.
Who gets riled up and why? Because I must admit that a brother of mine who I've mentioned before in certain conservative circles gets will be driving with me somewhere like Manarewa, and he'll point out the cycleway and he'll say, Jesus Christ, that cost $1 million a meter, and there's nobody on it. You can see there's nobody on it, but somebody is stirring these people up.
Yeah, it's interesting. So it tends to be people who, for whatever reason, can't see themselves on a bike. And they tend to be older, they tend to be white, they tend to be male. And they have very strong opinions about the amount of access that they should have in their cars that they have always had, and the enormous amount of privilege that provides. But for so many people, they don't have that. And cycleways, because they cost some money, and because some people see them as unnecessary, have become a political hot potato. And everywhere they go in, around the world, they are controversial. Christchurch is no exception.
Sorry, can I just add, it also doesn't help when you don't have a functioning public transport system. I think that is the big thing too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, we know that we need to change how we travel. We know, and it's not just the climate change. So climate change is my thing. I hold the climate change portfolio, but we know that it's also about safety. So this particular one, Park Terrace, was 3 lanes of traffic along there. It's still 3 lanes for the bit where it's really needed, where there are actually cars all the time near Beeley Ave. But this is an area where school kids were crossing to go to school. And now what we've done is we've made it so they only have to cross 2 lanes of traffic with a pedestrian refuge in the middle. And that's through putting in temporary infrastructure. So for many years, our councillors have said to us, some of them have said, they're too expensive, we want cheap ones, we want trial ones, use plastic bollards, and that's the way we'll go. And now we've put one in and they're saying, we don't like it, pull it out.
Yeah. So this is why I'm fascinated with the Park Terrace cycleway, Sarah, is that this was done quite quickly, couple of weeks, drilled in the plastic bollards. It's safer, clearly safer, and obviously people are using it. And it strikes me that one of the problems that we've seen, not just here, but all around the world with cycleways is this view that, well, we're going to have to build an entire new structure. We're going to have to keep the roads there for the cars. They can't lose a single lane, and we're going to have to build something new, and that's going to make it expensive. Whereas it seems obvious to me, you simply remove the car parks and or one of the lanes, put in one of these drilled in bollards and get cracking. Because one of the core problems, I think, with our need for mode shift is it has to be fast and it has to be cheap and not all about concrete and steel. You know, it has to be like really get on with it because 2030 is too late. And
Absolutely.
and seeing this success of a very quick move, and then the backlash, and as you point out, the councillors should have read all their emails apart from anything else. How is this going to play out? Because what we have now is the old white men on the council, that's my views, are saying, no, we have to rip out those bollards and put it back in there for the cars. And what we're going to do is we're going to have a vote next week, and there's going to be a quick survey in which we ask people, how bad is the cycle lane from 1 to 5? Is it really bad, incredibly bad, going to end the world? You know, it's all a big UN plot. I'm paraphrasing.
I have heard that. I will say, actually, the survey is a good survey. And so the survey asks, if you use Park Terrace, and how do you use it? Do you use it as a driver, a passenger, a pedestrian, a cyclist, that kind, or other? And then asks whether the current changes have made your journey the same, better, worse, that kind of thing. And so I think that's quite useful. The problem is, of course, the survey closes on the 11th of June because it was put in a while ago. Mm-hmm. And the vote on whether we keep it or not is on the 7th of June.
Oh, that makes perfect sense.
You know, I think we need to hear from the public. But actually, we've got another missing step in that our community board is supposed to have the delegated responsibility to get the public feedback and give us a recommendation. And what this notice of motion does is take away the ability for the community board to make a recommendation to us. And the community board would really like to be able to do that.
Just finally, and maybe for both of you, how do we get through this logjam where cycleways have turned into some sort of culture war-y, you know, standoff, shout and throw episode, when actually what we need is people to calm down a bit and work out, you know, what are the basic benefits and costs here. And if you do a very simple and not controversial analysis, you reduce the country's carbon emission liabilities, you improve the health of people, you have fewer people getting knocked off their bikes or pedestrians getting knocked off because the cars are slower. It's a hell of a lot cheaper to ride a bike than it is to drive a double cab ute.
Well, you can do both though, Bernard.
I think.
Sorry?
Yeah.
You can do both.
Yeah.
Well, not at the same time. But
No.
Yeah. But you can have both, I suppose. But the
the
point
thing is, I would say that one of the things is that all of that is true. And there is so much data everywhere that shows us the benefits of people biking more and the benefits of putting safety improvements in. The problem is facts don't change minds. And that is a universal story, and there's a whole pile of research on that now. And actually, you need to find other ways of connecting with people. So through shared values, you know, finding actually what do we value? We value the ability for kids to have independence, and we value their ability to go to school by themselves once they reach sort of 8 or 9. But that means that we need safe infrastructure for them to get there. So we've been doing our slow speed neighbourhood stuff at the moment as well, focused around schools. And all of that feeds in together. So it's less about the facts. We know the data, we can keep throwing it at people, but it's about connecting with people, sharing, finding values, sharing stories.
Tamitha, just a final question for you. You know, how do you win the hearts and minds of the Thornton Key Collective and their lawyers ahead of the appeals court case?
Oh, I don't know, and I probably shouldn't comment because I don't want to jeopardise anything.
The court case.
But I think just that I totally agree with what Sarah was saying, and I think a big priority too has to be having a good functioning public transport system, because I think it really frustrates people when their bus doesn't show up and
Absolutely.
then they're seeing well, it gets cancelled, they're waiting in the rain, and then they see a cycleway being built, like it just that would be extremely incredibly frustrating. But I think trying to show people that building cycleways, taking out parking allows more space on the road, makes the buses even more efficient. And so I think we've just got to be committed to really improving both of those
Yeah,
things at the same
changing
time.
mode must mean that there's got to be multiple modes.
Absolutely.
Tamitha Paul and Sarah Templeton from the Wellington and Christchurch City Councils, respectively, as councillors. Thank you so much for coming on the Hoon. It's lovely to see you and for taking
Thank
the time
you.
on a Friday evening.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers,
Have a
it's
good
great.
weekend.
Thank you very much.
Cheers. And it's time now for Peter and I to wind up with a skateboarding
Well, Bernard,
dog.
I hope you've got one, because I've been looking for one and I haven't really found a good skateboarding dog. I'm actually a bit depressed about it, actually.
Oh, no, I've got some good ones for you.
Oh,
I've been
good.
saving them up.
Excellent. All right, you can do the skateboarding dog this week.
Well, firstly, the Mr. Matt, the Mr.
We're going to get
Putin's
shat on
chef-
for chatting too, by the way. But
Oh,
carry
no,
on.
no. This is fun chat. Okay, so Yevgeny Prigozhin,
Yes.
the Putin's chef, had a map behind him in a photo that turned up online, and a very busy staff reporter, James Halpin, had a closer look at the map and realised it had various pins in the map of where Wagner Group had, mercenaries fighting, including one pin in the map on the Chatham Islands.
Well, they're famous. Are they down there harvesting power?
There must be. So James
That's where I get all my power from.
contacted Yevgeny
It's a power
Prigozhin,
play, actually, isn't it?
who said, and asked the question, are you about to invade the Chathams, or have you got plans for some sort of military action there? And he said, I'm not going to give my Russian accent. We will not share this information. Everything has its own time.
Of course, that's a bit of a threat, isn't it?
Yeah. And then the
I
final...
think we better send an Orion or a Poseidon out over there to make sure that there isn't a Russian submarine out there.
Yeah, or maybe the single 757 we have, which is the thing that the PM takes the journalists
Yeah, well, I
to
don't
in
think we
China.
can do that. I think that's again very unfair, Bernard. The 757 is a executive transport vehicle or a troop transport vehicle. It is not there for patrol.
And just pivoting back from
Yeah, have you got another skateboarding dog?
Yeah, pivoting back from global affairs to council affairs. For those who've been following the whole Wayne Brown dramas this week, where he locked some reporters out, and
Even I saw that this week, and I just thought, Jesus Christ, what a dickhead! Although he should be the first. When I finally launch OK Boomer, he should be my first interview guest after Chloe Swarbrick.
oh, them together on the stage.
No.
would be
I think
quite
one
good.
after the other. Yeah.
Okay. Well, here's some fun. So yesterday he tried to convince everyone that the Auckland airport shares owned by the council need to be sold. There was no choice, he said, and he accused various councillors who were opposed to it of being financially illiterate. Well, for fun
He's
today, he decided
illiterate.
to forward on a collection of emails that he'd been sent by his supporters, and he forwarded it on to all his fellow councillors. And of course, in the council, every councillor has one vote, and the mayor only has one vote. So every vote, the mayor has to, gather a coalition of councillors in favour of the things that the mayor wants. So he sort of has to be nice to them, has to try and convince them. So what he did was he got together all these emails and forwarded it to every councillor, including a bunch of emails that said this, including this one that said, hi, Mayor Brown, can I ask which of the dipshits councillors are against the sale of the airport? Shame you can't kick their ass, without spelling their correctly.
Or
Their
ass, probably.
Yeah, as that's where their brains are. There are a bunch of other comments as well along the lines. And so this is Wayne Brown forwarding them on to councillors, including a couple of bits of celebratory comments to Wayne Brown. The next round of champagne and smoked salmon is on me, said Roger. Keep doing what you're doing. Auckland needs you now more than ever to sell these shares. Just extraordinary. We thought we wouldn't be infected by the whole Trumpy, madness, but we've got our own version of...
We've got our own dickhead, yeah.
And on that note, it is time
Yeah,
for
I
us.
can't wait to get back on Monday and just open up the Herald and see how things are going with Wayne.
Yeah. No, welcome back to the calm and relaxed.
Jesus, you've made it
Aotearoa.
sound like I'm going to be living through the next 5 months of an election campaign, which is,
Oh,
you
yeah.
know, there'll be sausage rolls
Look
and
forward
all
to it.
sorts of bollocks. You know,
I'm
Mosgiel
tempted to,
blankets with Kias with carcass on them.
Yeah.
Does the Mosgiel blanket factory still exist?
Good question. Probably. I
Only
hope they
hunger
do.
blankets, Mosgiel
Yep.
blankets. I've seen at
No.
Webb's auctions
And
that
this
they
is.
are a very sought after
Oh, really? Oh, the
item.
sort of
Yes.
tartan thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, the Mosgiel blankets, only hunger blankets. There were others I know that made, you know, when we produced things that people wanted as opposed to kiwi fruit and wine.
Yes. And well, I shall have to look out and make this the merch that we do for the kaka.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I like
Yeah,
it, Bernard.
and I got a funny feeling that Simon is going to cut this out of the final broadcast.
Thank you very
Pete,
much, everybody. Bernard,
Peter,
I'll see you next week, and we'll talk
yes,
about what we're going to do. And I'd like a vote from the
yes,
from the
safe.
from the haka list. Oh, actually, maybe while you're away, we call it the haka, but that might be cultural appropriation.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
it's almost there. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. All
Peter,
right.
have a safe trip. We'll see
See you
you
later.
this week.
Bye.
And
Thank you,
thank you very
everybody.
much to everyone for listening to The Hoon. I've been Bernard Hickey. You've also been listening to co-host Peter Bale.
See
See
you.
you all next week.
See you shortly. Bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.